We had a good session this past session, and I think that will provide a great baseline of where to begin our work this coming year.
MDOT presents the Extra Mile Podcast, Legislative Session.
Got to have the ability to get that product to market.
As long as you're performing, we want to be behind you pushing.
Welcome into another edition of the Extra Mile Podcast Legislative Session presented by the Mississippi Department of Transportation. I'm MDOT Deputy Director of Public Affairs, Paul Catul, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host, Will Kraft. He handles government and constituent affairs here at the agency. And Will, the batteries are hopefully recharged. We're rested up. The 2023 legislative session is underway. And the last time you heard from us, we teased that we'd once again be doing weekly episodes during the legislative session, and that is indeed the case. And for the first episode, we thought we'd try something a little different. Our guest is from outside of MDOT, and she's not an elected or appointed official, though we will have plenty of those in the coming weeks. Today, we're pleased to welcome Emily Wagster Pettus. She is with the Associated Press, and this week, 22 years at the AP. Wow. Emily, that's quite the career with the Associated Press. Thank you so much for coming in and talking with us.
Absolutely, I'm happy to be here. Thanks for asking me.
Of course. So let's start out. 22 years. That's a long time. How did you initially get into journalism, and then why in particular did you want to be a political reporter?
Sure. So I grew up in Texas. And when I was in 8th grade, I signed up for a home economics class as an elective. My English teacher, Mrs. Gray, came to me and said, no, you can write a complete sentence, so I'm recruiting you to the newspaper. So I started working for the Hawk Highlights at Pleasant Grove Junior High School and never looked back. I guess never had an imagination to go into, becoming a stockbroker or a dentist or something that would be, more lucrative. But, yeah, I've just always wanted to be a journalist ever since then. So here I am.
That's really cool. How about the political aspect of it? Was that always kind of a passion of yours?
Yeah, I've always been interested in politics. And I went to Ole Miss, graduated from there. And once I got out, I had my mind set on trying to cover politics. So when I was working for the Clarion Ledger back in the 90s and the legislative job came open, I was like, please, can I do that? So, yeah, this is actually regular session number 30 for me, which makes me feel so old. But
that was the Clarion Ledger right after college? Is that where
the Vicksburg Evening Post for a year,
okay.
And then the Clarion Ledger for 10 and a half. So,
10 and a half, wow.
Yeah. Been covering the legislature since 1994.
A long, illustrious career.
Kirk Fordyce was my first governor. Broke me in.
Oh, wow. So when the session starts, are you looking forward to it, or you're like, oh, I've got to hunker down, really work hard for 3 months? Or
honestly, the last few years, my job hasn't given me much of a break during the off session with like the Jackson water crisis and various other things going on. So I do always kind of look forward to the legislative session, a little bit like the first day of school,
Yeah.
Awesome.
And so back up just 2 seconds because I'm curious about this. So, again, with your longstanding career and everything you've seen all these years of experience, the media landscape, right? Things have seemingly changed a little bit in the last few years. Now we've got podcasts everywhere, and Twitter's, the animal that it is, Facebook, social media. People get their news from all over the place.
That's right.
And not so much seeming like, to me, from print media. How have you kind of noticed that and dealt with it as you're going through?
It's changed tremendously since I got into journalism. And as you mentioned, Twitter is one way to get information out quickly. We use that a lot during legislative sessions. We will often live tweet debates. And yes, I still write the traditional story that people read either in a printed form in the newspaper or on their telephone. The deadlines are much more immediate. I used to write one version of the story, and I could kind of, go back, kind of like stretch my fingers. I'm going to work on my lead now. But, now it's much more immediate. Like, you've got to go, get back to your laptop and get at least a version of the story out there as quickly as you can.
I believe it. Because the nature in which things happen so quickly, which you just said, I've never thought about that part of it. Yeah, if you're somewhere covering a story, then you got to turn around and you got to get it out too.
That's right.
So you got to get ahead of the camera almost.
Pretty much.
Because it's so quick. Wow. Yeah.
Yep.
Goodness.
Yeah.
So we want to look forward, but let's look back a little bit. So MDOT, covering MDOT over the years, are there any memories or any stories in particular that stick out in your mind?
That's a really good question, and I have to say that MDOT is one of the agencies that I have not covered as intensely as I've covered some other things like Medicaid and Human Services, for example. So I would love to have a great story to put out here about MDOT coverage, but I mean, my coverage has mostly been from the perspective of being at the Capitol, trying to follow infrastructure funding, like when the legislature did the road and bridge local funding
Right.
with the lottery. Yep.
Yeah. And the special session. How many special sessions have you been a part of?
But let me say first, there's nothing special about a special session. I've been part of lots of special sessions.
sure.
I don't have a number on that, but you know, for a while there were governors who were calling them for big things. I mean, there've been big things like Nissan and Toyota
Sure.
and Continental Tire, and there have also been special sessions for projects that really kind of didn't go anywhere. The post-Katrina session was really something. I mean, that was obviously a great need in this state to get some things done. So, yeah.
Fingers crossed, no specials this year, right? Yeah,
That's
fingers
right.
crossed. We can
That's
just knock
right.
it all out. Well, talking about the session, you know, and there's always stuff going on. This one is a little different, not so much different, but every 4 years it kind of looks like this. Does the election season of it kind of play into anything goes on legislative-wise?
Oh my goodness, that will be the overriding theme of this session, right? Most of them are running for re-election, and of course, if they're going to put their name on the ballot, they want to come back. And so, yes, they're going to look at further tax cuts. They're going to look at the possibility of some sort of compensation increase for state employees, whether that's a pay raise or some money going into the public employees retirement system. There's going to be some showboating, believe it or not.
Right.
Yeah.
No.
I know, shocking, right?
Yeah, and I mean, again, like you just said, you know, it's always something in the back of their heads. I know, because you have to run for an election. That's a process you have to go through and deal with. And you have to put your name out there. So I can imagine it is pretty heavily weighing on their minds right now, whether they want it to be or not. It's always kind of in the back of your head that right around the corner, I gotta get on the ballot here.
That's right.
And I guess we've changed the qualifying deadline now.
It's earlier. That's
Yeah.
right. It used to be March 1st. It's February 1st now. So it's a very short time period. If people want to run for office, starting today up through February 1st, get your name on the ballot. And that's, you know, for legislature, statewide, regional offices, also for like county supervisors, offices like that.
Yeah, so it's coming up quick. So all that going on in the background too. I can't imagine. Yeah.
Very much so. So MDOT podcast. During the 2023 legislative session, what are you looking at when it comes to MDOT and transportation infrastructure?
One thing I know specifically is that Delbert Hoseman said in the interview with reporters this morning that he's looking at putting an additional $100 million into roads and bridges. Now, that's probably more like local funding than state funding. Sure. But as y'all know, and I'm sure as your listeners know because they're savvy, a lot of the MDOT money comes from the federal government. And so that's essentially like pass-through money. You know, the legislature has to approve it, but there's not a lot of policy debate like trying to take money away because, you know, it's federal money, it's coming here. Yeah.
Yep. And we're more than happy to see that $100 million to come this way. If I had to guess, that may be one of a number of things. You know, we've got the Emergency Road and Bridge Program, which is exactly what you were just talking about a minute ago, and that's usually about that $100 million number. You know, the other two things that we've had in this past session as a result of the federal money was having that match money to be able to receive all of the federal money that we were getting. So I know there's a couple of things that hopefully are on the radars and are getting worked out over there. But yeah, like you said, day one too, right? We're getting the ball rolling. I think they gavelled in at noon today, and I saw a couple out at lunch today too. So everybody's moving around, got the suits in town.
That's right.
We're
Suits
wide
are here.
open. Yep. Paul, what you got? Anything else?
Oh yeah, just so we talked to MDOT a little bit, but obviously there are other things going on in the session. So what are you keeping tabs on when it comes to really anything else out there?
Well, Jackson Water, of course. That's a
it.
big issue. I mean, not only for the capital city, but for the entire state of Mississippi. Jackson's the one having these problems now. Other communities are going to start having problems in the future because as infrastructure ages, problems come up. And so, you know, and Jackson's a capital city. The health of the state relies on having a healthy capital. So that's one thing. We did ask both the speaker and the lieutenant governor about this today. They did not make any commitments to throw any more money toward Jackson. I mean, there's millions of dollars going from the federal government right now.
Right.
So that's one big issue. You know, we're going to keep an eye on, as I said, the compensation for state employees because that's always a topic of discussion during election year. They did a big teacher pay raise last year, so I don't expect they're going to come back with another big package for that. But They are going to look at things like funding for the possibility of school districts that want to go to a modified school year calendar. So instead of having a long summer break, you would have like 9 weeks of classes, 2 weeks off, 9 weeks of classes, 2 weeks off. And during those 2 week intervals, the students who need some sort of remediation would be able to get help so they don't fall so far behind. There are a few districts around the state that are doing this already. Corinth was one of the early adopters. And, it's really it's going to be a community decision. Delbert Hoseman said that the state's not going to force this on anybody, but if districts want to go to it and they need to have some bureaucracy erased and they need to have a little extra funding for it, he's wanting to push that issue. It'll be interesting to see if the House jumps on board with that as well. So, yeah.
Awesome.
There's always things that are at play over there that we don't necessarily know or follow, but it's always interesting to hear. The education stuff. Obviously, that's not really one that we're following and making sure because we've got to make ends meet elsewhere. But I didn't even know that was a conversation about the.
And it's interesting. There are implications for a lot of things. I mean, if you look at the way families' lives are structured, parents at this point are accustomed to finding daycare plans for their young children during the summer. So then you look at a different calendar, maybe you're having to worry about 2 weeks of daycare at a time, but more often during the year, for example. It probably also impacts high school sports, which a lot of people care about. You look at like when the volleyball season starts in late July, early August, for example, if you're on a modified school calendar and you're on your 2 week break during that time period, how does it impact volleyball, football, softball, whatever?
Yeah, I would have that would be totally just alien to me. I'm sure, I for whatever reason they're trying it, so it must be some good things that are happening as a result of it. I'm sure it makes it easier in some ways and harder in others, maybe. I don't know.
I think a big argument in favor of it from the people who like it is that, and I don't have a position on this, but I think people who like it say that it helps students retain their learning. Like you don't have that big loss of learning that you have during the summer when you're not there for however many weeks.
Probably true. I had to look up my password just from being the couple of days we had in and out with the Christmas holidays where I couldn't remember how to log in up there. It's always stuff going on.
Well,
go ahead, Bob.
Oh, no worries. So we do have some fun questions for you. Before then,
Okay.
Is there anything that sticks out in your career of covering politics, Mississippi, past 30 years? What maybe a favorite story or anything that's happened during that time?
Oh, my goodness. I mentioned Kirk Fordyce up front on this, and that was a heck of a way to be broken in as a young reporter covering him as governor because he didn't love us. And, he didn't make any secret of that. So, Fordyce was certainly an interesting character, slightly traffic related. He did have that big life-threatening accident on election night in 1996. I was in the newsroom. We were just expecting to cover congressional elections and, Bill Clinton getting reelected. And all of a sudden my editor comes in there. She's like, oh, my God, Kirk Fordyce had a wreck. And, and then we had to scramble that night and find out what happened to him. And it was crazy.
Wow.
So sort of traffic related, I guess.
Well, anything dealing with Governor Fordyce I know was entertaining and a lot to deal with
That's
back
right.
in the day. Yeah.
That's right. So
one more random one for you before we get to the question.
The most important question.
You mentioned income tax or taxes and election year, all these things. Are you hearing anything about specifically income tax that they're going to kind of try and further work on that?
It's interesting you asked that because just today, House Speaker Philip Gunn modified his stance ever so slightly on that. He's been saying firmly that he wants to eliminate the income tax. This is his last year as Speaker. That's been his goal all along. And today he's like, you know what? Yeah, I still want that, but I'm also open to a lot of other discussions. So instead of phasing in the current tax reduction over 4 years, maybe we can squeeze it into a 2 or 3 year time period.
Okay.
Or maybe instead of having a 4% top bracket, we can end up with like a 3.5 or 3.75% top bracket. It was interesting because he wasn't like, it's my last year, I have to have it gone altogether. Like he's kind of, maybe taking a more realistic approach to there are people who want to talk about a lot of things, so maybe we'll talk about a lot of things.
It might still happen anyway.
It might, but, Delbert Hoseman was really, at this point, saying he's reluctant to make big structural, long-term changes to the tax structure because we don't really know what's going to happen with the economy in the next couple of years. And so he's looking at maybe a one-time rebate. If you paid $400 in income taxes, you can get up to $400 back one time instead of having it like something that's built in permanently.
Right.
Yeah.
I think I do remember hearing something about that now. Yeah, I don't know if we'd actually realize much in that one-time rebate or if it would be better to like you said, have something kind of permanent come of it? I don't know.
A lot of it's your sort of philosophy of the size of government. Like, how much service do you think government needs to provide? And it is no secret that Mississippi is one of the poorest states, and there are a lot of you can call them unmet needs, you can call them something else, but there are a lot of things that people think should be done that are not getting done. Like
Sure.
there are rural hospitals that are really financially struggling right now, just as an example.
Oh, and that conversation about the core functions, what is the government at its core level supposed to provide? And I think that debate continues to rage daily.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Well,
fascinating. Will,
the
it's
ringer.
your time. It's
The
your time
ringer.
to shine.
So this is one that we started jovially having this question at the end of every podcast, and it's quickly become apparently a listener favorite. We love to eat. We all like to eat. It's Mississippi.
That's right.
So we got a food question for you.
Okay.
And we can kind of do this two-phase. So one, you spend a lot of time traveling the states, I know, being a journalist and covering a lot of material, being all over the place. Is there anywhere around the state where you're traveling, maybe a hole in the wall, maybe somewhere you don't get to go by too often, that it's just, man, we got to go check it out?
One of my favorites, and I think it's not even open anymore. Oh. I used to live in Ocean Springs, and I would drive across the bridge to Biloxi, and I would go to Old Biloxi Schooner and get the shrimp po' boy with cheese and put a bunch of hot sauce on it.
Okay.
And get some fried okra and a cold Barks. And to me, that was just like the greatest meal.
And it's not open anymore, though?
I mean, I think they moved after Katrina, and then I think they moved again, and I don't think that they're still open. I would be so happy if I were wrong about that.
The podcast team is on it.
That's right.
We'll check it out.
We're doing some research.
What about when you're in Jackson? What about a session going on or whatever brings you here? Is there a favorite spot?
Yeah, so I live in Jackson.
Okay.
This is my home. So my husband and I like to get Thai food on Friday night.
Oh, yeah.
Pick that up, take it home. I spend a lot of time downtown, so, got lunch from Basil's today.
There you go.
Steve's downtown. There's also an Ethiopian restaurant downtown that I really like.
Oh, it's really good.
Yeah.
Oh, you've been to that one?
Yes. I forgot what it's called. But
Shiro.
It's very good. Shiro, yes.
Yeah.
There.
It's great. It's pretty heavy.
It's small. It's family run. The woman who runs it couldn't be nicer. Like, you go in there, you have a pleasant conversation with her, and she'll dish your food up, and it's a good meal.
I'll have to go check that out.
I do believe she's like the only person that works there. She like cooks the food and runs the register and everything. So
occasionally her
for
son
her.
will be in there, like during
Okay.
summer break. Yeah.
There we go.
I'll have to go check that out.
It's very good.
That's pretty good. My last comment here, got to give a shout out to our permit folks, Brian and Hunt, taking care of us, checking us out on the podcast. Hope you guys are enjoying the episode and all the good info. Good to see you guys out there.
Absolutely. All right, well, this has been fascinating. I've certainly learned a lot as we kick off the 2023 legislative session. Emily, thank you so much for coming in and joining us.
Yeah, hey, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So we'll go ahead and wrap things up. Thanks to our listeners out there for tuning in to the Extra Mile podcast. You can watch and listen to episodes by visiting gomdot.com/the extra mile. Follow us on social media at Mississippi DOT, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, etc. We want to thank our producer, Katie Hornsby, our editor, Drew Hall. They do a lot of work behind the scenes. And remember to drive smart out there on Mississippi highways.